Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video I'm going to talk about what's the use of module.exports in Node.js and how exactly we can use it. We will see a live example of how module.exports is used, and then we will also see how exports is used, which is kind of a shortcut to module.exports, and what things that you need to take care if you do try to use the shortcut. So let's try to understand why we would use module.exports in Node.js, and the answer is to write modular code. Module.exports lets you expose your functionality that you have written in Node.js to the outside code. So if you have written your code once, then you can expose it using module.exports, and then any other node code can import that functionality and then call it so that you don't have to rewrite that functionality, right? So the answer to that is to write modular code and to avoid duplication of code. So now let's go to see a live example of how we can use Node.js module.exports. So I am into my Sublime text and I have created a directory called node modules. First I'm going to create a file called calc.js. Let's just save it and call it calc.js. And we are going to expose two functions here. One is addition and subtraction. So let's just go ahead and do that. We'll just say var add is equal to function. We'll take two arguments and we will return x plus y. And we will do a similar thing for subtract, and let's define it as a function. Again, it takes two variables and we'll just return x minus y. And now what we want is we want to expose this functionality outside. So to do that, you have to say module.exports, and what we will do is we will define it as an map, and here we will say add as add and then subtract as subtract, right? And that's how you export or expose your functionality outside. So let's go ahead and create a new file. Let's call it demo.js, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say var calc is equal to require dot slash calc.js. That's how you import a local Node.js module, which is this. Now this calc will return, this require will return an object module.exports, which will expose add and subtract functionality in this code. So let's just go ahead and print this out. So let's say adding 2 plus 3 is equal to, and let's just print calc.add, and let's pass through 3. Similarly, we'll do subtraction. We'll say subtract 5 minus perhaps 4, and let's just say calc.subtract 5 and 4, and that should suffice. So let's just go back and confirm. We have add, we have subtract, and we have calling the same method add and subtract, which we have defined here. So let's go ahead and try to execute our demo.js and see how it works. So let's just execute this. To execute, just type the command node and then demo.js, and you can see it says adding 2 plus 3 5 and subtracting 5 minus 4 1, and that's how you can reuse the functionality. So to go over it one more time, we defined some routine or some code logic, and we wanted to expose it so that other code can reuse it. So what we did is we exposed it using module.expose, and we added two functions and mapped it to the two functions that we have locally. And in demo.js, we just import it using the require keyword, and then we directly called the method add and subtract that we had defined earlier, right? So the other way to do the same thing is not have this at all, and you could just say module.exports.add, and similarly module.exports.subtract. So let's just fix the spelling mistake, and this should work as well. So if you go ahead and try to run this one more time, you can see that this works as well. So you can do either way. You can either say module.exports.add, or you can define a map separately and then use that to map those functions. Both are valid. Now let's come to the next way in which you do it, which is using just export. And like I said before, it's kind of a shortcut to module.exports. So we will now see how we can use that to do the same thing. Okay, so to use exports, all you need to do is just use exports. So you can remove the module altogether and just say exports.add and exports.subtract. And this again does the same thing as module.exports. So if you run this one more time, you will see the same result, right? So now let's try to do the same thing with the map functionality that we had earlier with module.exports. So let's just define it as a variable like we did before. And what we will do is we will say exports is equal to add and then subtract, right? And now let's try to run, and you can see this has failed, which says calc.add is not a function. And this is because this is a wrong piece of code that you write. And to understand this, why this fails, let's go back to our documentation, and I'm gonna take you to export shortcut documentation, which is in node.js.org. So you can see it says the exports variable is available within the module's file level scope and is assigned the value of module.exports before the module is evaluated, right? So exports is a file level scope local variable, and it is assigned the value of module.exports before the module is evaluated, right? However, if you go ahead and override this assignment to exports to something else, then it no longer points to module.exports, and that is why it breaks, right? So you cannot do something like this. You cannot reassign this variable, which is exports, right? However, you can do that with module.exports, because that is what is expected to expose your functionality outside. However, you could do exports.add, exports.subtract, something like that, right? So you can do something like exports.add is add, and then exports.subtract is equal to subtract, right? And this should work now. So let's go back to our console and try to execute one more time, and you can see that this works. So that's how you use exports or module.exports to expose your functionality out. Just make sure if you are using exports though, you should not reassign this variable as a whole, but you can add more functionality to it by adding functions or references that you want to expose out, right? And finally, coming to require method returns a reference to what you are exporting. So in this case, whatever is under exports will be assigned to calc, and then you can call this methods that are assigned to calc using this reference. So that's how Node.js module.exports or just exports work in Node.js. So thank you.